My name is Ashley Klein-Jimenez. You are joining us for our web conference today, Taking Prevention Online, Tips and Best Practices for Facilitating Engaging Online Events. PreventConnect is a national project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, sponsored by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views and information provided in this web conference do not necessarily represent the official views of the U.S. government, CDC, or CalCASA. So our objectives today, as Tori and I were kind of talking through this web conference, there are a lot of questions, and we did put out a pre-conference survey that many of you responded to, and thank you so much for that. It was great to get that feedback and to see what the questions were, what some of, the successes you were seeing or opportunities you were seeing, but also some of the difficulties and challenges. And so we thought, what can we, really successfully get to in this web conference? So today we're really hoping to be able to talk a little bit about what are the possibilities of virtual platforms, but also what are the limitations. Not everything can just be put on a virtual platform, right? We also really want to walk through some of the logistical factors that we can consider when we're hosting virtual events, because there are some differences depending on what type of event you are trying to do. And then we also wanted to share some key principles in engaging folks online and discuss some opportunities to adapt in-person activities to online platforms. So that's kind of where we are today. We know that there are a lot of questions, a lot of really specific questions about how do you do prevention online. And we will be continuing to look at this topic and dig deeper. And so please know that this is not, the one and only time that we'll be having this discussion, as so much of our context has changed.
Yeah, Ashley, that is such a good point about, our current context is changing day by day. And we grabbed a picture of this map that said it was last updated August 21st. So who knows how this map has changed in the last 6 days. So we know that depending on where folks are joining us from, and apologies to the Canadians on the call, I didn't have a map of Canada to include today too, but we know that the restrictions that states and even down to county, city, and town levels that folks are experiencing due to COVID-19 change, and they change fast. So we wanted to frame this conversation around how can we be flexible with prevention programming? How can we give you all the tools to be really confident and comfortable with having online meetings, knowing that the context and circumstances that we're all going through with COVID-19 can change in an instant. So we want you all to feel like no matter what this map looks like, you all have the skills, or at least a good starting point for how can I have engaging online meetings right now. So as Ashley mentioned, we heard a lot from you all. We had quite a few responses to our pre-survey. And so we lumped a lot of the responses into these two categories of what were some common challenges we heard and what were some common opportunities that we heard too. And these are things that we'll be discussing more in depth today. Ashley, did you have anything you wanted to elaborate on here?
Yeah, Tori, so just like you said, these are the things that we really pulled from the feedback that we received from you all that we can address on this particular web conference. As I mentioned a few moments ago, we will be looking at future opportunities to discuss specific programs going online and what some of that guidance might look like in the future. So these are things that we feel that we can address today and can hopefully give a nice foundation. And as Tori said, to be able to be adaptable and kind of flexible as our context continues to change.
Mm-hmm. And with that too, knowing the challenges we're in now and not knowing the challenges that we'll face even a week from now, we wanted to have a moment to talk about, why is prevention so important in this moment? And Ashley, I think you had some really good points to add here.
Yeah, Tori. So, I mean, I think that, there's a huge concern and like a very valid and important concern that people are being or are experiencing, I should say, more violence right now. And so the need for advocacy and access to crisis services and resources is super important. At the same time, we also know that given the current context and how COVID-19 is impacting, families, communities, and society as a whole, that there are a lot of increased risk factors for sexual violence and intimate partner violence, which makes our work around increasing protective factors to be able to buffer against those risks, extremely critical, right? More important than ever in some ways. And so, like an example that comes to mind is that people are being isolated. So we think about, young people are being really isolated right now at home and maybe in environments that aren't safe or at least not supportive. But we also know that connection to caring and supportive adults can build resilience and can be a protective factor. So while we absolutely need advocacy resources, it's also so important for prevention to be continued and sustained. And so often we know that in the face of a crisis, prevention is kind of the first thing that gets thrown by the wayside. But there are a lot of opportunities right now for being able to think creatively about prevention, to be able to expand prevention efforts to some of those community level strategies. I've talked to a lot of prevention practitioners that are really seeing this as a new opportunity to engage parents and adults in the home in new ways, just because there seems to be an increase in access to parents during this time. So I think prevention is super, super critical right now.
Absolutely. It's critical right now. And we also have the skills to be flexible and be adaptable. And I know what folks had said in the survey, and I think, how we message prevention right now also matters, because previous messaging may or may not apply to our current context. So really wanted to uplift these two resources that I know folks are probably very familiar with around prevention messaging. So this is a skill that we are all still building, and having this solid foundation of how can I frame my messages, what messages work best, especially when we are, in such a digital age where a lot of our messaging is coming out on social media, on Zoom, on slides, or things that are pre-recorded. So how can we be flexible and adapt and still align with the best available evidence? And Ashley, I think you have a little bit more to say about, what is our evidence base right now? Where are we all working from?
Yeah, Tori. Well, I mean, the kind of truth of the matter is that there is a lack of evidence-based online programs. And so many of the evidence-based programs and curriculum that folks are implementing in their prevention work, was evaluated for in-person implementation. And so we don't necessarily know what that means for taking it online. So that's an area that really needs to be looked at, and that, definitely deserves more discussion and more space. But what we do know is that risk and protective factors, those haven't really changed in terms of their importance to our work. And so one thing that, a lot of practitioners were talking about kind of at the beginning of social distancing measures being put in place across cities and counties and states was this real need for creating and sustaining and strengthening community connectedness. And we did, and Tori, maybe you could put links into the text chat. We did a series, we did 2 web conferences actually, talking to different community members and organizations that were really having to think, like, how do we continue to connect with our community and build community connectedness in the face of social distancing. And they have some really great examples. And so if you're looking for what could that look like, how do we continue to be connected to one another, I would really recommend taking a look at some of those resources. But we know that, you know, Tori, just like you said, context has completely changed. So even things that were created to be online pre-COVID, things that we've been doing really well online, those probably need adapting too. So it's really forcing us to take a step back and really think and kind of like get back to the basics, right? So I think that, and I think you put the link to the technical packages in the text chat, but what are the things that we know? What are the strategies and approaches that we know work that we can move into virtual settings, or at least into settings that allow for social distancing?
Absolutely. So, you know, knowing that a lot of folks are working in virtual spaces and have those skills to adapt, go back to basics, analyze risk and protective factors, you know, promote those protective factors in their work too. We're going to shift now, and we're going to talk about, we're all online all the time. So how do we make our prevention programs engaging online? Knowing that folks are experiencing a level of online burnout, how do we make these engaging and fun and, you know, really allow folks to deeply connect with what our prevention programs are online? So I told you we were having fun with polls today, and I wasn't lying. So we are going to ask another poll of you all, and we want to know, how many virtual meetings, web conferences, etc., have you attended in the last month? Ashley, the option of I lost count is incredibly popular with almost 90% of folks have lost count on the number of virtual meetings, web conferences, etc., whatever you want to call them, online convenings, online gatherings. Folks have been on quite a few. So we know that this is something that people are pretty familiar with, that, you know, we're online a lot. We're meeting together online a lot. Sarah says 2 to 3 days is about my average for, 2 to 3 a day. Wow, I was reading that as 2 or 3 days out of the week. That's a lot. And a lot of folks are in the text chat echoing same. So we know folks are online a lot, and it kind of feels like almost everything we do now is online. So hashtag zoomed out. Yes, Laura. So while we have people online, how do we make that the best experience possible for folks? Ashley and I want to walk you all through some of the possibilities and limitations of virtual platforms as a good place to start. You know, we can't do exact replications online. So what can we do? And we'll build and go from there in talking about how do we engage folks.
Thanks, Tori. Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that we have to kind of do, and I'm sure that most of us already have, is kind of just be realistic in what is possible virtually. What are we doing that makes sense to move over virtually, that we could do really well virtually? And things like that, it's just not going to give us the same outcomes that we are hoping for. And so I think one of the places to start is to kind of know your purpose, right? What is the purpose of your online event? Are you trying to build community? Are you just sharing information? Are you, do you have some information that you need to get out to a lot of people? Because we know that web conferences can be used for a lot of different settings. The type of communication that you're hoping for, the number of participants that you're expecting, those are all really important factors in determining what kind of web conference or web event you are trying to plan. So we kind of see these broken up a little bit. So when you are just kind of like providing information, right? So like one person, a couple people are providing information to many people, similar to like a lecture. That's what we would consider there's communication from the presenter to the audience with limited interaction, right? Like that's one way that people go about doing virtual events. And I'm sure I've definitely been in spaces where that, I can't see what other people are saying. I maybe can't even see who else is in the room. All I know is who is kind of talking to us. A meeting maybe could look like a session with a limited number of participants, and there's a lot of interaction between them, right? So, there's over 280 of us here in this room. So, the interaction can go really quickly when everyone's typing in the text chat. But you all can see who is in this room with you. You can see what people are saying to the larger group. And so there is considerable interaction between the participants. If you're trying to do community building, like that's probably one factor that you need to consider when you're thinking about what kind of platform you're using. Not all platforms allow for all of the participants to see what the other participants are saying. I was in a web conference a couple days ago where I was a presenter, but so I could see what people were saying, but they couldn't see what each other was saying. So they weren't really building community with one another, right? It was really, I was sharing knowledge to them, but there wasn't a lot of open communication. So knowing your purpose, like what is the purpose of this virtual event is a really good first step in figuring out what kind of platform you want to use, what kind of options within the platform you might use. So it's a good starting place. Tori, would you go to the next slide for me? Just as important as knowing your purpose, and I'd love to encourage you all as we go through this to please, if you have, insights and experiences and tips that you'd like to share, please feel free to put those in the text chat. We'd love to be able to highlight what you've learned. Because many of you have been on, you've lost count of how many of these you've been on in the last month. So another very good starting place is to know your audience, right? And so knowing our audience, there's a lot of considerations that go into what makes up our audience. And there's things that we have to think about in terms of how accessible is what we are proposing to do. So I have to say that my work with PreventConnect has always been online. But in a COVID-19 context, not going into an office and doing this from home, it is not as easy as it once was. I don't have great internet bandwidth because of where I live. And so, we've really had to kind of adjust and pivot the way that we run our web conferences so that we're able to keep them going because of that. So thinking about, if you're working with folks who maybe don't have access to the internet for a variety of reasons, just deciding to switch everything to a virtual environment is clearly alienating that audience. Also thinking about, accessibility measures. We have closed captioning provided right now. Not every platform allows that to happen. So, if that's something that is one of your values in terms of making things accessible, that's something that you'd really want to think about when choosing a platform. Security measures, we are using Zoom and we have put in place all of the security measures that we possibly can, but that is a real concern. I think I saw some news stories in the last couple of weeks when students were starting back on school virtually and there were like Zoom bombing incidents. So definitely thinking about those security measures. And then if you're working across different, areas and geographic locations, taking into account time zones, I've definitely been on virtual events in the last couple of months where people on the East Coast are working probably later than they typically would have to kind of accommodate people's schedules. So, that is a consideration that, can get a little bit difficult, but we have to think about that in terms of our audience. And then Zoom fatigue is real. We're all probably feeling that. And so again, just kind of lowering our expectations and taking into account the fact that not being in person can be kind of dehumanizing and expecting things to just continue to go status quo. And so really taking that into account, I think, is important. I am looking in the text chat because I see that there have been some comments. And so folks are talking about there's online virtual sticky notes. Thanks, Trish. Katrina mentions that Zoom has a whiteboard. That's true. So there's a lot of really great resources being shared in the text chat. So thank you all. I'll keep my eye on that. Trey, would you go to the next one? And I think you're going to talk about methodology.
I sure am. Thank you, everyone, for all that you've added to the text chat so far. And Sarah, you bring up a really good point. The exhaustion that folks are feeling can be really compounding right now because we're not just dealing with a global viral pandemic. We're also dealing with what some folks are calling the pandemic of racism that's been happening for 400 plus years, culminating in a new civil rights movement or a re-emergence of a civil rights movement. So, folks are feeling a lot, and that physical disconnection from each other can be fueling some of that too. So we'll discuss throughout and provide some resources at the end for what folks are doing to bring humanity into virtual spaces too. And I think that speaks a lot to the first point on this slide. What's your teaching style? What's your presentation style? And how does that translate onto a virtual platform? Folks are sharing in the chat all of their wonderful tools that they're using in order to get all of those different styles together. So I really appreciate that. And then when you're thinking about your methodology too, thinking about, does this make sense to do this real time versus does this make sense to do something pre-recorded and just release it out into the world? So one of the examples, and I'll just use PreventConnect as an example. When we're doing something that we wouldn't see folks feeling like they want to engage with it a lot. If we're just disseminating information like, hey, here's a research article, that's something that we would do asynchronously, whether as a podcast or a blog. If it's something where we feel like a conversation is going to come out of it, much like what is happening right now. Ashley and I could have pre-recorded this and put this on as a podcast, but we also realized that, folks are doing a lot online right now, so they probably have a lot to say in this conversation too. So that is when we do something in real time. So kind of taking a moment to think, how am I engaging my audience, and how is my audience engaging with me? And that will help you determine, am I hosting this event in real time? How much time am I going to need? And versus is this something that I can just record or write or disseminate out? So we want to do a little bit of practice with each other on, what would you do? How would you decide if something is going to be asynchronous or real time based on the scenarios that I'm sharing in the poll right now? So for the first scenario, your organization wants to build knowledge among your community about the connections between racism and oppression and sexual and intimate partner violence. Is this something that you all would want to put out in real time or asynchronously? So this is knowledge building. The next one is on, your organization wants to build community members' skill in interrupting racist, oppressive, and or violent norms. So for skill building, would you want that to be something real time or asynchronous? And I see the numbers are still climbing fast for the poll response. And Ashley, we've got about 2/3 of folks saying for the first scenario, for the knowledge building scenario, that is an event that they would do asynchronously. So just kind of make it and put it out there. Versus for number 2, for the skill building, that is something that over 90% of folks would want to do in real time. What do you think about those results so far, Ashley?
I think it's interesting. I mean, I think it also depends on what type of platform folks are using. So, there's a lot of videos out right now, a lot of podcasts, a lot of different ways to virtually engage people in terms of like building knowledge around different topics. So I could definitely see that being asynchronous. At the same time, these are definitely topics that involve conversation and processing. So I think I understand the real-time selection as well. I think definitely if you're trying to build skills, that does require, real-time engagement.
Mm-hmm. And Leander brings up a really good point about, with knowledge building, wouldn't it be important for people to be in a space where it feels safe to ask questions while they're learning? That is a great consideration when thinking about, am I going to do this as a real-time event or an asynchronous event? How many questions are folks going to have, or how can I address questions as they come up too?
And Tori, I think Rebecca had a good point too, that it doesn't have to be either or, right? It could be both. Like there's no reason. It's just to have to just choose one and go that way. It's just, there are these different kind of, because there is so much Zoom fatigue or, virtual engagement fatigue, it is thinking about like, what are the things that you're planning on doing and what can be asynchronous and what, has to be real time. So it's just those considerations, but I do really appreciate that point from Rebecca.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Gina and Ashley are also adding some great points into the chat too about, like the exhaustion that folks can feel on real time versus, some folks feel a little more present with real time. It's a lot to consider. So, really just want to plant those seeds too for what are the considerations that folks are going through. We're going to move forward and talk about what are some logistical factors. So we're going to get really tech heavy here for the next few minutes. Before we do, and Ashley, if you can paste this into the text chat, we want to know, and folks have already started talking about some great online tools that they are familiar with, but what virtual web conferencing, meeting, convening, gathering platforms are you familiar with? So we've heard some various tools being discussed earlier. Now we're seeing folks know about GoToMeeting, Zoom, WebEx. Wow, that just got a little too fast for me to read. Microsoft Teams, Google Chat, Google Meets, Adobe Connect. There's one that someone said was a free resource, Jitsi, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correct, a free and open resource. Seattle schools are using Teams, so definitely want to know more about that. Blue Jeans, yes, so folks have a lot of familiarity with what is out there. Google Duo is a personal favorite of mine for not work activities, for doing group and family phone video chats, so love that one. Kahoot. Kahoot is a great way to do online games. So, you know, folks who are typing or folks who are reading the text chat, there are so many options and many more when we start considering what are the platforms we can use for those asynchronous events too. House party is another one, of course. So there are tons of options out there. And I want to uplift something that we read in the survey from you all. Someone replied that they created a Google Classroom on sexual and relationship violence prevention. Initially, they tried a 6-week program, each week with a different topic: awareness, rape culture, healthy and unhealthy relationships, consent, healthy education, and bystander intervention. And it had very varying levels of success, and again, more adaptations to make. So folks are using Google Classroom in really innovative ways beyond school-based education. So thank you for including that. So there are some things to consider when we're choosing a platform. One of them being, how easy is it for folks to use? Or is it easy for you to use as a host? How easy is it for participants to use? I know Ashley and I, when we are looking for ways to use our new technology or what new technology should we use, we love our friend Google to see what other people have posted on message boards or things like that about how they have been able to use all of that. What's the size of your audience and how can the platform best facilitate that size? For folks working in small groups, how does the platform make it a little more intimate and interactive versus for folks using larger groups, what are the security features like, or what other host controls do you have to you know, make sure that 20 people aren't unmuted with their dogs barking in the background. As always, cost is a consideration, not only the license costs, but are there additional costs per workshop, per session, per conference call line, etc. And then reliability, you know, if we're investing money into, or even just time into the platforms, both our own and our participants' time, how reliable is that going to work for everyone? Rebecca's asking, is Google Classroom more interactive than Zoom? Folks who have experience, please add that to the text chat with how folks feel about Google Classroom versus Zoom. Folks are also saying that Facebook has been a great tool for them with private groups to do moderated conversations, videos, etc. So really cool to see the innovative ways that folks are using platforms that we were probably using before the coronavirus lockdowns, but we're just using in new ways now. Other things to consider when choosing a platform. Do you all want audios and visuals? Do you want the ability to share videos? Do you want the ability to share profile pictures so we can see that Ashley is not alone in having farm animals and other critters in her profile picture? If it's a smaller conversation, do you want folks to be able to choose whether or not to share their videos? Do you want folks to be able to network with each other and see a visible list of who is in each session? How do you want the chats to play out? I know for us, the reason why we do this in Zoom meeting is we want you all to be able to chat with each other and to be able to see each other. So that was a big deciding factor for us. Is there a whiteboard? And now that we know that there are external whiteboard applications, how can you use other whiteboard applications within your platform, like the one that was mentioned earlier? Is that like Zoom, where you share your screen and I am the one who has sole control of the slides, so Ashley is at my mercy for how quickly I can change her slides? Or is it something where you upload it into the platform and anyone who is a host has the ability to control the slides? Do they have breakout rooms, and how can you manage those to have those smaller, more close discussions with folks? And does it allow for polling questions, or what other ways can you engage your audience on this platform? So those are really good features to look at. Jess says, yeah.
Oh, sorry, you're headed to the text chat too. Go for it.
Okay. I see that Jesse says, I think there's a value to the recognizability of the platform and brand. It's hard when we're expected to get oriented with so many different platforms. Absolutely. I've noticed that a lot, that we migrate kind of towards the same things and just use them in different ways because it's what we're familiar with. I also see from Trish, Pear Deck integrates with Google Slides to make presentations more interactive. This is awesome. I can't wait to send out this text chat to you all because you all are providing such a wealth of information here. Any tips on playing a film for a virtual audience on Zoom so that the film is not glitchy for the audience? From Solma. Cross your fingers and hope your Wi-Fi is good. So, and Ashley, feel free to jump in here. I know folks recommend preloading the film so that way you're not having to buffer it in real time. Personally, I've done that with friends on Zoom just by sharing my screen and sharing my desktop audio. I don't know if folks have other recommendations for virtual film screening platforms. I've attended one on Zoom, and they did the same thing where they preload the film, or they show the film from like QuickTime Player or a file versus sharing from a streaming service, so they don't have to worry too much about their Wi-Fi. And I see Rebecca has some great insights on that one too. When you share your screen, optimize the video and share the audio when you hit share screen or do a watch party. Ashley, are there other things in the chat I'm missing? I know I'm like 11 plus messages behind.
You got to the ones that I was pulling out, Tori. Yeah, I mean, I think that so much of this, and now, you know, folks are talking about Netflix watch party. So the great thing is that there are so many tools at our disposal that can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming, especially if you're not like a super tech savvy person. And while there are these really great tools, I think like that consideration of what is the usability of them for folks who, you know, don't have great bandwidth is a consideration, because, you know, Adobe Connect is a platform that we use, but we found that if participants did not have really great bandwidth, it wasn't very seamless. There were a lot of like tech hiccups. It took a lot of bandwidth up. So something like Zoom we found doesn't do that quite as much. So yeah, so that's just one thing. And yes, Megan, it is very dry and clunky. You know, we did learn that from reading message boards, that we were not the only ones having those tech issues. And yes, Elizabeth, we will be sharing the text chat and pulling out all of the resources you all are sharing.
Thanks, Ashley. So definitely encourage folks to still keep the conversation going in the text chat of what platforms they're using and how. This is really enriching the conversation, and yeah, we don't know everything about everything online, but this is why we have these spaces, so we can all share in that knowledge too. So super appreciate everyone bringing all of their expertise into today's conversation. Some other details to consider when choosing a platform. Some folks really want the platform to reflect their organization and how their organization looks and their style guides. So do they have that sort of customization feature available? And then of course, always needing to consider what do you need as far as accessibility? How does live captioning work? Is there a possibility of having language interpretation, including American Sign Language interpretation? If folks are working at or with government agencies, some government agencies may not allow certain applications or certain websites. I know we've heard that, you know, some folks can't use YouTube on their workplace devices. So, you know, kind of doing some digging around of what can your audience or what can you personally use. And as we've said, bandwidth is a big concern of folks. You know, Adobe Connect took up a lot of bandwidth for folks. It seems like some other platforms maybe less so. Or, you know, if you're working with folks in rural communities or, you know, just in general, do folks have access to the internet? Do they have access to enough internet data to sit on a long real-time web conference or meeting? And then what devices can folks use it on? Not everyone has personal computers. When you're thinking about your audience, can they join from a smartphone, from a tablet device, or just join from the phone too? So keeping all that in mind when exploring the various platforms that are out there. So Cynthia asked in the text chat, and this is probably a good question for other folks to reply to in the text chat. Have you all done any participant evaluations, pre-post tests to measure knowledge retention or presentation feedback, etc., after your virtual classes? If so, what's the best way to increase the evaluation return rate? Great question, Cynthia. I feel like some folks in the audience are going to have some answers for you. Some of our final points on choosing a platform, and Ashley's touched on it before, is thinking about security. You know, we're working off Zoom. There's a lot that we do in session, before the session included, to make this a secure in the technology sense space. Also thinking of, if you want folks to register, how do they do that? And what are your options for following up with folks who register? Following up options being something very important for something like sending out a post survey and registration for sending out a pre-survey. Do you have the ability to record it? Is it something that you want to record? If it's a knowledge or skill building that you want folks to be able to access later, how and what gets recorded within the platform? Another thing to consider. What is the customer service of the platform like? Again, that's where those, looking up those online message boards or speaking with your colleagues, like folks are doing now, to gauge, you know, if I have an issue, how easy can our customer service reps fix it? And then the last point on this slide goes into the conversation currently happening in the text chat. What data does it collect as far as name, email? Can you ask other specific questions? And how can you disseminate your evaluation collection on there too? Or what kind of evaluation collection is already built in to the platform? I see folks are responding to that question about how to send out the pre-post tests and increase evaluation return rate. Folks are building in time and asking people to fill it out while they're still on Zoom together. I see SurveyMonkey coming up a lot. I also see QR codes that folks can scan on their smart devices, and also including links in the chat. So I see links in chat boxes is a very popular item. Laura says that using class marker, it's not the best but using it for Google Classrooms with the teacher and putting evaluation metrics as assignments, that's really interesting. So for folks who are working within classroom environments too. Sending out a SurveyMonkey after the end of it, using Zoom's poll feature, so any sort of in-app thing going on there. Yeah, Ashley, is there anything I'm missing from that conversation in the chat?
Elsa had a question about anyone doing pre-post tests and how do you pair the responses, and it looks like Kate responded to that. And then Sally says, we use a retrospective pre-test at the end and also with a follow-up email to be able to track individual change. So, thank you all so much for just sharing with each other, sharing with us, all of kind of the ways that you found to be able to work in this virtual setting. Tori, should we talk a little bit about some of the principles of online engagement?
Let's do it. Take it away.
All right. So first, we'd love to know from you all, what are things that you feel make a web conference, a meeting, any kind of virtual convening engaging? So if you would let us know in the text chat, what are those things? What makes an engaging virtual space? The chat, thank you, Hannah. I'll see, polls, discussion rooms, breakout rooms, participation expectations are known pre-meeting. So letting folks know before they get to the meeting what that might look like. I see a lot about legible visuals, opportunity for creative expression. Mosey says movement. Change in the flow of things, so using different kinds of modalities, polls, chats, videos. Esther says music. I attended a great workshop with a playlist. Oh, that's amazing. Hearing from many of the participants, the chat, pre-meeting notes or slides, multimodal pedagogy. I mean, yes, all of these things. Visual aids are a plus. And Misha, thank you for that point. For some people, the chat box is really a distraction, and we've definitely heard from people that actually close the chat box and don't look at that because it can be very distracting. But thank you all so much for sharing what you think makes a virtual convening engaging. So one kind of tip, I guess, that we have for you is to really make something engaging. I really believe strongly that we have to do a practice session. And what that means can look differently, of course, from person to person. I mean, a practice session to me is getting familiar, with the flow of the presentation, with where we're going to switch modalities. If there's multiple presenters, knowing like where those people are going to come in. Using the technology the day before, just so I'm familiar with it, because it's really, really hard for me personally to be engaging when I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing at the same time. And honestly, sometimes that happens because I'm a human, right? We all are going to have those days where we're just like not on it. But I think that doing a practice session and really taking time to prepare in a way that maybe we wouldn't have done for something in person does set us up to be able to be more engaging in the moment. So that is something that, I think is really important to doing virtual convening. Other things, and these, again, are a little bit more logistical, but they do definitely relate to being able to make things engaging, is to think about, depending on what kind of convening you're doing, what the audience is going to be like and what modalities you'll be using, identifying and assigning roles can be really helpful. And Megan brings this up in the text chat. Having a co-facilitator to help manage the chat while you present is helpful. Absolutely. So I realized that, you know, some of us are literally like the lone person doing this work. And so that might not always be an option. As much as it is an option, having someone kind of host and facilitate, and of course these can be shared roles, but someone kind of handles the technology aspect. You know, if you're facilitating a session and people are having tech issues and sending you messages, you know, asking for help, it's not going to be, it's not going to be quite as successful as being able to facilitate and help people with their technology, right? So something like that, you know, even on the best days, there will be some kind of technology issue. So having someone who's maybe managing the text chat, you know, there's over 250 of you in the audience right now, and you see how fast the text chat can go. We really want to honor all of the wisdom that's in this room. And so that's why, you know, it's important for us to try to both, Tori and I have eyes on the text chat. So identifying and assigning roles as much as that's available to you is one kind of consideration in being engaging. I think, you know, really recognizing people's time, just because things are online does not mean that, you know, we can just throw timing out the window. And so, you know, being respectful, starting on time, ending on time, those I think are really important considerations of just like being respectful of one another. And then, you know, as much as I sometimes, when we do our little tech tutorial in our web conferences, think, oh my gosh, if you've been on one of these web conferences before, you've heard me say this a million times, it is really important to do a tech tutorial for folks who, you know, need that learning. Not everyone knows how to use Zoom. I don't know how to use Zoom half the time. So that tech tutorial is really important to, you know, make people feel like they can engage and they can be part of the conversation as much as possible. And thank you, Lindsay. I see scheduling a short break if the meeting is longer than an hour can help with engagement. Absolutely. These like marathon virtual convenings that, you know, I'm seeing, I understand that our work has to continue and that there are so many important things impacting our work right now that, you know, we have to continue and respond to, and at the same time, really like taking into account that this can be really difficult to just sit and be engaged for hours at a time. So some more things would be to really think about, you know, when do you want to launch the platform? If let's say that your meeting starts at 2 p.m., do you launch it right at 2 p.m.? Do you launch it a couple minutes early to give people time to settle in? We, you know, typically will open our sessions. I don't know if you can hear dogs barking in the background. There's another tip. Just roll with whatever's happening in the background. But so we open early, and you know, one thing that we do, and again, sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, am I being so annoying because I just keep saying the same thing over and over again? But I don't want to just have dead air, right? I want it to feel like if we were in person and you walked into the room and I didn't say anything to you, that would be really awkward and really dehumanizing and really rude on my part. So filling the dead air at the beginning, you know, letting people know, welcome, this is what you're here for, this is who I am, I think can be a really important step in creating a space where people are more likely to engage. Knowing if you are inviting other people, and thank you, Martha, I think playing music is something that I don't know that we've ever done in a PreventConnect session, but I love that and I'd love to try that. Knowing when to check in with presenters. So also, you know, if you're inviting guests, you're inviting presenters, making sure that they're comfortable with the technology, that they're ready to engage with folks online. This one, leading with high energy. So I kind of hesitate to put that there, but at the same time, that really means whatever that means for you, right? We all have different presentation styles. We all have different levels of what high energy means. I think the main point there is that because we are, you know, not in person, it does take a little bit more intent, I would say, on us as presenters to engage people and to keep people interested. And so, you know, again, that's going to mean something different to all of us. That is not a prescribed, like, you know, this is how, you know, we should facilitate or act. But I do know for myself, I feel that it's important for me to have a little bit more energy than I maybe would if we were in person, because there would be other ways that you would see that I am trying to engage you or also be engaged. Welcoming participants by using names, you know, I think, again, like, how do we humanize these experiences where so much of that humanistic piece that we would have in person is not available to us? So doing something small like that, just, you know, saying, you know, hey, Esther, you know, thank you for that comment about, you know, adding songs to a Spotify list. I think that personally goes a long way. I know when I'm in a web conference and I, you know, make a comment or ask a question and someone uses my name, that makes me feel like, you know, I'm engaged. We're engaged in a conversation. Consider using live video. Obviously, I'm not using live video right now, and part of that is because of my bandwidth. But I think that that's something that, you know, we let people decide, our presenters, if that's something they're comfortable with. I think it can, especially in small groups, be a way to engage. And I know that, you know, personally, it's great to see my family and friends on video, but these are different circumstances. And so I think it's a consideration, but I think that it also, there are a lot of things that go into that consideration. And then treating attendees as collaborators, you know, especially if the point of your convening is to create community and create space for learning and discussion. We're all collaborating on this together. You know, just like in this web conference, we obviously have a platform and we are sharing some of the things that we've learned, but you all clearly know so much about engaging people online. You're doing it every single day. And so you really are, you know, you bring just as much wisdom to anything that we do. And so I think that that is another really important consideration in engagement. Just because, you know, someone might be running the platform or acting as the facilitator, just like in person, attendees are really collaborators. And then I think someone mentioned this in the comments about, you know, what makes something engaging to them. So visuals can be, you know, an important piece. We really try to use visuals that reinforce what we're saying. So, you know, thinking about what kind of visuals you want to use. I think being spontaneous and flexible is big, considering that technology won't always work, or things don't always, you know, go as planned. Maybe you had a conversation planned and the attendees want to take that conversation somewhere else. You know, that happens in person too, so that's not really anything different. So being able to be spontaneous, being able to be flexible, also just like being kind to ourselves and knowing that, you know, we don't control a lot of things. In fact, I have an animal making a lot of noise right now, but hey, I'm just gonna go with it. And then lastly, and this was another point that a lot of you brought up in the text chat, is engaging the audience using multiple modalities. So one kind of best practice tip is for your audience to touch their keyboard every 15 minutes. And that can really keep people engaged in a different way, right? If you're every 15 minutes either launching a polling question or asking a text chat or putting people in breakout rooms, you know, anything that's causing folks to have to touch their keyboard to engage with their screen, can be a way to keep people engaged. There's other things that, you can do depending on the platform. Many of you have shared what those are. There's reaction emojis, using film clips or audio in a different way. Victoria says, I'm seeing more virtual presenters stand up while they present in an effort to keep themselves more energized and more engaging. I mean, yes, absolutely. Did I say 15 minutes? No, I did. So Linda, apologies for the barking animals. So we would say like every 15 minutes. So if you have an hour session, there should be 4 touch points, right? You should have 4 ways to engage at the least the audience. Tori, would you go to the next slide? And Tori, if you're seeing anything else come up in the text chat that I'm missing, please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, you have done a really great job keeping up with the text chat. And speaking of engaging people, we want to know from folks, what other ways have you seen people engage their audience or online participants? What other best practices have you seen people come up? As people are responding though, Ashley, Boris has a really good question, which I think kind of leads into what we're about to talk about, but I'll let you address that as people are talking about what other ways they've seen people engage with their audience or online participants. Boris says, what do you do when you have a supervisor leading the whole meeting?
Well, I wish I had like a succinct, easy answer for that. I mean, I think so. One of the things that obviously is not special or, only happening in virtual spaces, but that's, how are we creating equitable online spaces? And that's a consideration that there are some tools that we are going to share with you. But I think that's a consideration for us as people who may be designing these online convenings or facilitating them is, what is that perception? Is there one person that is always facilitating or always leading, or what does that those shared roles look like? So Boris, I think that's a real concern that a lot of other folks have probably had and are seeing. And so I welcome anyone to give any feedback on that in the text chat as well. So Tori, if you move to the next slide. So this is an article, and we'll put the link in the text chat, but, oppression and inequity absolutely shows up in online meetings. And so there's a quote from this article that will, Tori's given you the link. And the quote says, technologies like video conferences and online surveys are great tools, but simply moving planned content to an online platform isn't going to be effective at engaging the folks who are already left out of traditional approaches. And then they give examples: older adults, non-English speakers, immigrants, people living unsheltered, people of color, people with disabilities, low-income service workers, and other people who don't have reliable access to the internet. These are the people who are continually excluded from the traditional decision-making process, and sticking with go-to methods in an online format really perpetuates the status quo. The COVID-19 pandemic offers us an opportunity to recenter equity in our work and maintain our commitment to dismantling the systems that continually disregard and oppress communities. So I think there are some, articles and discussions happening around this issue, but I think that thinking about how do you equitably communicate through virtual platforms, how do you maintain, I'm so sorry, how do you maintain virtual convenings that are equitable, that feel like everyone has an opportunity to engage and to be part of the conversation. And so Tori, if you go to the next slide, these are some more kind of considerations that we found. And again, we'll be giving you these resources. But you know, there's been some work done around teachers going back to school and bringing students online virtually, and kind of like what are ways that can really alienate students that can show up in virtual settings. So, you know, obviously connecting students' video use and eye contact to participation points, that's like very kind of status quo, and yet, you know, it's really important that we give people the decision-making process to turn their video on, to keep their video on, to use a filter. I mean, there are so many considerations that go into like safety and privacy and all of that. So I think that this little infographic is a really good kind of resource for us. And then it continues. And Tori, did you put the source for this?
We got this as a JPEG, so we will find it and include it in follow-up information. And yes, Gina, I will go back one slide. Though I do want to bring up what Sarah put in the text chat, which is something that we were talking about in developing this web conference too, and I think speaks to what other folks have talked about, kind of going back to, you know, how do we create these equitable spaces in design too, and in planning for the facilitation. So something that we've heard requested from folks is, you know, when going into a breakout room, supervisors should excuse themselves from breakout rooms when they're with people that they directly supervise, so that way folks can communicate a little more freely. But then Sarah in the chat has some really great examples of ways that you're keeping community engagement and community voice at the center of your virtual meetings. So Sarah says, assign facilitation roles within the group if the meeting is small enough. For example, ask for volunteers for note taker, equity manager, timekeeper, someone to facilitate a group closing, etc. This helps develop participants as stakeholders in the meeting by sharing some of the facilitation tasks, and builds participant capacity too, thus helping keep folks engaged. So thank you for sharing that. And I think that equity manager piece is also something really interesting and innovative that I hadn't heard of before, to see, you know, who are we hearing from a lot, who haven't we heard from as much, and what can we do to make sure that we are kind of power balancing, or just making sure that we're not replicating systems of harm within our own meetings. And Erica, we will get you the source for these two slides. It looks like it was created by Tori Trust, and we will get that. It was sent to us in a photo format. So need to find Tori Trust. So and Ashley, feel free to chime back in, but you know, we're all working from home, living at work, and sometimes there are sounds in our environment that are beyond our control. And thankfully, the animals in my home right now are napping, knock on wood. So we also received this resource from our colleague, Sarah. So thank you, Sarah, talking about how do you lead groups online, but also how do you lead groups online during the middle of a global pandemic, in the middle of a revolution or reckoning around civil rights too. So I just wanted to uplift some of their suggestions they had that I felt really resonated with me, and I think might resonate with other folks too. So expect to do less. There is a huge mental load alone of just staring at a computer screen all day. When you add in everything else that folks are experiencing on a global, national, local scale, that's a lot. And we're not even thinking yet about how is this affecting folks personally. So expect to do less than what you had planned to do with original items or in-person items. And that leads into the next point of prioritizing that connection and community with folks over content. Ashley had opened this session talking about, one of the protective factors that we have a little more control over and that we can really uplift during this time is community connectedness. So focusing on creating that community virtually versus, just getting all the content out. Folks may not be able to absorb your content or any of our content if they feel disconnected, like many do right now. And then again, giving yourself a break. Stuff is gonna happen, whether we like it or not, whether we plan for it or not. Sometimes you gotta get your piglet spayed the day before a web conference and take care of a piglet and make sure the piglet doesn't get heat stroke like Ashley is doing right now. So laughing off tech and other hiccups, being gentle with yourself. This is new to everyone. Nobody knows how to handle a global pandemic on top of a racial justice reckoning, on top of everything else. Sometimes, yes, Katrina, sometimes you're a solo parent with nosy preschoolers stuck at home. And what is another protective factor that we're all looking at with preventing sexual and intimate partner violence? It's empathy and building empathy building. And if that is the biggest thing that you can bring into your online meetings with folks is having empathy with yourself and with others and the situations that we are all in right now, then that's good. You're on the right track. So I pasted a link to this resource in the chat. I definitely recommend that folks take a look at it. It's a great resource and very timely right now too. So Ashley, I think we're ready to move into our last text chat question, unless you have anything that you want to add from this conversation.
I just really am appreciating the conversation in the text chat and, all of us kind of recognizing where we are and what, we're individually juggling and what, our communities are juggling. And still, having this commitment to, prevention and finding ways to move forward.
Absolutely. So we want to know from folks, what will you take from today's conversation to incorporate in your next online event? So I'm going to give folks a minute to marinate, respond in the text chat. Ashley, we have two big questions that came up. So I'm going to read Alyssa's first and maybe see if you have any suggestions of how to facilitate that. Any suggestions for how to moderate breakout rooms? I've been in a few where conversations have gone sideways, not understanding the question or intended outcome. For example, I went to a training that was discussing gender roles, and my breakout room ended up having discussions that I think ended up reinforcing gender roles for the participants in the group. I was not the facilitator.
Yeah, I think that, something that I know a lot of people are bringing into their virtual spaces is having like some kind of community agreement. And so that can kind of, frame things or kind of set the stage. I think that that's another reason why doing some type of run through or practice session is really helpful to try to, think about if this were to happen, like what is our plan, or what are things that, how could we support each other in the breakout rooms? I think that would be a suggestion. And then I'm also looking at what other people are saying to see if there's any suggestions there. What was the other one, Tori?
Yeah, so it was actually a statement instead of a question, so apologize. But I do feel like, Julia, what you had pasted or what you had posted in the text chat is very, very, very important, and part of the reason why Ashley does her reintroduction at the start of all of the web conferences. So Julia says, I think it's really important if you are recording a webinar or program to make sure that participants are aware that you're recording, and or find a way to record the presentation part of the program, but not the discussion part of the program. Absolutely, that's super important. And I know folks are finding ways around that in Zoom to make sure that those breakout rooms are not recorded. Folks always have, as the host, the pause recording. Wow, I'm getting all of my vowels completely mixed up today. Pause the recording when going into breakout rooms and discussions. So really great point, just so folks know if they're being recorded or not, for legal reasons, for consent and safety reasons, all of that.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you all for, I'm reading through what, people are taking away and thinking about incorporating into next online events. And so, I really like this music idea. The other point, Chris says check out different platforms suggested. And I'm sure that if you have looked at platforms, this is not new information for you, but if maybe you're just starting out in this process, most platforms will do, you can connect with someone like probably like a salesperson, I guess, and they will kind of walk you through it and do a little bit of a session with you to be able to answer questions, see what the technology provides and what the possibilities are. So we've done that with so many online platforms, and I think it's really, really helpful. Yeah, I mean, gosh, thank you all. Again, honestly, I will be the first one to tell you that we have so much to learn. Things are always changing in terms of virtual engagement and technology. And, I've learned so much from you all today in the text chat. And so I'm just so appreciative of that. Hopefully, you are walking away with some ideas and some things to look into. We will be pulling out some of those resources that were shared and creating a list that we can share with you all. And then we hope to have this web conference recording available within a week or so. Tori, I don't think we put a slide for what is happening next week, which is kind of silly of us. Do you want to share that with everyone?
Yeah. Speaking of hiccups, and I can't believe it's already next week because it technically starts in September. So there's this little thing happening next week called the National Sexual Assault Conference. And Calcasa is the host this year. We are super excited to have the very first virtual National Sexual Assault Conference. So it is entirely virtual. It is a free event. I believe registration is sold out for almost every event, but I would still recommend, if folks haven't registered, to do so, because you'll be alerted when recordings are available, things like that. So we will be having all of our sessions on Zoom. We have a fantastic prevention track. I'm really excited for all of the sessions that we have. The prevention track is sponsored by the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. So amazing presenters and guests talking about the connections between sexual violence, oppression, racial justice, talking about the successes they've had in their programs with reaching LGBTQ+ students, and having really impactful programs there. Our plenary sessions are really exciting. We have 2 of those with great social justice change makers on both of them. So, and for our plenaries, since the registration is sold out, we will be live streaming those on the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault Facebook page and on our YouTube channel. So lots of ways to join NSAC next week.
Thank you so much, Tori. Appreciate that. So it is time. We wish you a wonderful rest of your day, whatever that looks like for you, and hope to see you on a future web conference. There is a chance that we'll be repeating this one because it did sell out. So if you have colleagues that you think would be interested in this, let them know that we'll likely be repeating this. But I hope you all have a wonderful day. I'm going to go handle this little piglet now, and thank you all so much. We'll see you soon. Take care. This ends our session for today.